So hello, welcome, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are tuning in to our Asia Talk number 8 of season 3 within our IJP Digital Dialogue series. The digital dialogues are a special format which is designed to foster the exchange of course, journalists from our network and beyond, as well as with experts from Europe, Germany, naturally, and the respective regions. I'm Martina Johns, Director of IJP's Asia program, and I'm more than happy to welcome my colleague as co-moderator today.
Hello, good morning also from me. My name is Vasilios Theodosiou. I'm also Director with IJP, responsible for the German Nordic program and the program with the United Kingdom. Yeah, please, Martina, you go.
I keep on talking about today's topic a little bit, give you a short introduction. Well, we had actually planned this talk around Christmas about the relationship Russia and China. And by today, we have to say it became more current than we had ever imagined. Still, we need to look a little bit back on the historic background of the Chinese and Russian relationship. Is it a real alignment? Is it a strategic alignment? Or is it an alliance? If we look back a decade ago, this relationship, aside from economic profit on both sides, was to be seen unreal, or at least most unlikely. However, under the constant pressures from the various US governments and from Europe as well, the two leading autocrats showed an appetite, a more and more closer appetite to cooperate. This trust was put a little bit aside or just hidden somewhere in the background. And suddenly China offers, as of yesterday, the role as a peacemaker. What should we make out of that? And the EU, and especially the German government, have woken up and to see our Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock and her Chinese counterpart Wang Yi talking on the phone to get China engaged in possible peace talks. That's a new movement. Is it only in the safe, well, keeping safe economic ties? China is very much interested in its Road and Belt Initiative, and of course the infrastructure, or is it more geopolitical aspects, or is it about its own reputation? Lots to talk about today. And yeah, floor is again open to you, Vasilios.
Yes, and even the future looks even more unpredictable after last week, because we want to have a tiny glimpse of what may come in the next couple of weeks and months in Chinese-Russian relations. What is on their agenda? What is the European perspective on their relation? And why is it important to care about all of this? While we had the idea it would be a kind of strong axis between Beijing and Moscow 10 days ago, now it doesn't seem to be that much of it anymore. After abstaining yesterday in the vote in the UN General Assembly, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for them, apparently? So let's have a look in the future, if possible.
And we do try to have a glimpse into the future with our experts. Welcome to all of you, and thanks so much for sparing an hour in these busy times. First of all, I'd like to introduce Marc Saxer, head of the Asia department of the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation in Berlin. He is today with us. Hello, Marc. He has a long expertise on Asia, as he had been representative to Friedrich-Ebert Foundation's offices in Thailand and India, which will surely play a role today in our discussion. And he is an analyst, strategist, and a publicist, and co-founder of the Asia-Europe Economy of Tomorrow project.
And please welcome Finbarr Bermingham, correspondent of the South China Morning Post in Brussels. He has been a long-standing journalist in many functions, and he's the current host of a geopolitical podcast on China. Welcome, Finbarr.
And now, last but not least, we go to Beijing, to Matthias Kamp. He is correspondent of the Swiss daily newspaper NZZ in Beijing. Matthias studied sinology and economics and had been involved with China, with Asia for many, many years. And he has recently reported quite a deal about the Russia and China relationship. Before we go into the details and open the floor to our speakers, short housekeeping remarks. Please put your questions into the chat. If you don't want to mention your name, we would be at least very happy if you could state the country from where are you asking your questions from and your media outlet if you'd like. And this meeting today is recorded for summary and graphic recording reasons, and we most likely will put it on our website during the next days. So, Matthias, give us a short review of the relationship Russia and China, maybe saying the last 10 years, so we do get a decent or more decent idea what the relationship was like before Russia started the invasion in Ukraine. And we would be very much pleased if you could elaborate on the current developments. And for the audience, the line at the moment to Beijing is quite weak. You have all seen Matthias in this on his video. If necessary, we will switch off and only have his audio line. So the floor is open to you, Matthias. Have we completely lost him? No, there he is. So Matthias, could you just give us a short insight?
I will. I just got kicked out of the session here. I don't know the reasons for that, but anyway, I was kicked out. The point is, it's a very sensitive issue, this Ukrainian crisis now, also for the Chinese government. So if you can't hear me, just give me a short hint and then we try again. Anyway, it's been a complex relationship over the past decades, since Mao Zedong already, the China-Soviet, China-Russian relationship. The Soviet Union was a big supporter of China, for China after 1949. Then, of course, they fell out with China in 1969 under Mao Zedong. And then to jump forward from the early 90s, they moved closer together, first driven by economic interests. China, with their economic boom, they needed energy, they needed gas, they needed commodities. And so this went on for quite a while, but it was never a real deep, trusted relationship. It was always like more a relationship where there were interests which they merged. And then fast forward again to 2010, 2012, when Russia suddenly realized that US was increasing the pressure on them and on Moscow, looking for regime change and for a different political system. And then came 2014, the annexation of Crimea. At the same time, Xi Jinping coming to power in China, and then the Trump administration getting really tough on China. So they both had this common enemy, the US, which let them move together, closer together, further. And so I would call it like an informal alliance. They've really moved closer together, but this relationship is not made up of deep trust. It's more like, as I said, the common enemy, the US. It's the both countries' autocratic systems, fear of color revolutions, of democracy movements, which like binds them together. And the very interesting thing, and that's why there's a lot of nervousness in the China leadership here now is, since that war has started, what does that mean to this China-Russian relationship? There's a lot going on behind the scenes, I think, right now, a lot of discussions, and so it would be very interesting to see over the next few weeks how this will evolve.
Matthias, would you really call it an alliance, a real relationship, or is it just a very unstable one?
I call it an informal alliance. It's not really a formal official alliance. Of course, we've had this 15-page declaration from February 4th, which surprised many people. And but is an how did we call it? Asymmetric relationship, whereas the very powerful China, the economic power, and there's Russia, a country with not much of an industry apart from commodities and gas and so on. So there's always this question: who is the younger sister? Who is the older sister? China sees itself as an older sister. It's a kind of alliance being driven by common interests and mainly by confrontation with the West and the US. And asymmetric alliance, informal alliance, is nothing formal or official, is driven by interest, and is still, and that is very important, I think, there's still a lack of deep trust. I mean, economic-wise, both countries engage in protectionism towards each other when it comes to investments, when it comes to merger and acquisitions and so on. It's not deep trust. It's mainly driven by interest. And as I said, the next few weeks will be very interesting to see how this evolves now, because I think in Beijing, they didn't expect what is happening right now and it's happening since 6-7 days.
Let's broaden the scope a little bit. Question for Marc. How is this crisis seen in India and Southeast Asia at the moment? We know that India had some really close economic ties to Russia, but also political ones in the past. Has this changed now? I mean, India abstained yesterday in the vote in the UN General Assembly, or has it remained the same? I assume the Indian public is well informed about the situation in Ukraine or Russia, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I would pretty much agree on what Matthias has said on the Russian-Chinese relationship. Maybe it would be useful to add one important aspect, which is Taiwan. The Chinese leadership is extremely nervous about anything which is a referendum where a secessionist part of a country can break away and could be recognized as an independent state. That is something that is not acceptable in Beijing, and that is, I think, one of the reasons why this uneasy informal alliance is more complicated than it seems on the outside. The voyage of India is pretty much the exact opposite of the Sino-Russian relationships. India and the Soviet Union had very amicable relationships. There is actually historical friendship. You can still see that and still feel that when you talk to people in Delhi, that Russia is considered a friend. That has some economic and political foundation nowadays, which is mostly when it comes to the provision of military equipment and arms. The Indian military, until very recently, was more or less exclusively receiving arms from Russia. That is starting to change right now. But I think it's important to see, if we look at the greater picture of Asia, that Russia is to the Indo-Pacific a peripheral country. It is a territorial country, obviously, but geopolitically, it's not one of the main players. The actual prism is obviously the US-Chinese clash over hegemony in the region, and that is the prism what everything is looked through. Meaning, the question of how you relate to Russia, looking from Asian countries or from Delhi, is always looked through the triangle, how you actually position yourself in this rivalry between the US and China. Russia is part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it's part of the BRICS. So there are some ties here between Delhi and Moscow. But these organizations are very informal, and it's not clear what kind of value they have in the end. I think for India right now, the absolute overarching concern is the clashes with China from 2020 and 2021 in both Sikkim and the Himalayas, which has really caused a paradigm shift away from the tradition of non-alignment that has always formatted Indian thinking over the last 70 years, and a paradigm shift which is really making it move ever closer into some sort of an informal alliance with the US, Australia, and Japan, called the Quad. That is revolutionary in Delhi, and that is basically the trend that we have been observing ever so cautious over the last couple of years. So it's interesting that India abstained yesterday because it shows that there is this balancing between these two power centers that is still going on. And it's interesting if you look at the map, I can show you one later. The same thinking goes in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. So South Asia, the bigger nations, the bigger powers there, so to say, the region of abstaining, and that has a lot of geopolitical reasons.
Thank you, Marc. Let's move on to Brussels. Finbarr, at least European Chinese relations are more or less defined a little bit more than maybe other relations through economic reasons. What do you think will be the economic impacts of this crisis? Will it shape the European view on China, make it even tougher? Because we maybe have realized in the situation that we can put sanctions on Russia and then we have no gas. But if we would put sanctions on China, we wouldn't have anything anymore in the stores. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I've been trying to find out this week, what are people thinking about this? I mean, I think they're rather preoccupied with the immediate sort of direct crisis at hand. It was explained to me yesterday by a European diplomat that they see China coming into play a little bit further down the line in terms of how they see the geopolitical impact. The first course of action is, of course, to try and get Putin to back down. Secondary is to try and strengthen the Ukrainian response. Third is to use the sanctions as leverage to try and get, to give Zelensky something to bargain with. And then the fourth stage of this is where they see the geopolitical fallout. Where does China come into this? So it's not the top priority, but it is being discussed. The European Union is asking China to try and use its influence to negotiate a ceasefire. This is something I learned this morning. They've been asking them to exert positive influence. They have access to Moscow. And Moscow listens to Beijing is what we're being told. So they want Beijing to negotiate a ceasefire. That's the official line, and that's what we've been hearing for the past week. There is a bit of frustration behind the scenes by Beijing's unwillingness to move and to budge on its 5 talking points. Beijing's persistence in placing the blame for this partly on NATO's alleged eastward expansion. So I think if you sort of if you sort of take those to the next level, if China does act as a positive actor and negotiate a ceasefire, I think maybe that there's not necessarily such a negative impact on EU-China relations. But if it's seen to not use its influence in a positive way, I think it's undoubted that this would have a negative impact on EU-China relations. One diplomat I was speaking to said that they don't trust China to do anything on this. They have zero expectation. They see this as a sort of, something that Beijing is studying closely militarily. It's a sort of great exercise from which they can learn about how to sort of, in the future, perhaps launch an invasion on Taiwan. A lot of the trust and goodwill that was built up between European and Chinese actors sort of evaporated over the COVID pandemic. speaking to the EU's disinformation team, they talk about Chinese state actors parroting Russian talking points and using this as a way to emphasize the weakness of the Western system versus authoritarians. All of this is building up to a pattern and a view of suspicion of China and how it's acting in relation to the crisis. Economically, I mean, I think you're right. Russia, I think I saw a note this morning from Gavical Dragonomics, the Beijing research house, which said that China exported $68 billion to Russia last year, and $1 trillion to the EU and US. So it's not really apples for apples. These are totally different ball games. I don't think that the EU could ever afford to cut off China in the way that it's cut off Russia. I mean, it hasn't cut off Russia. It can't afford to cut off Russia either. I think it's becoming quite clear as well in energy terms. You know, I think, and I'd be interested to hear the views of the other panel. I think that the actions in Germany on Sunday will have resonated incredibly loudly in Beijing. You know, China has always seen Germany, I think, as a little bit of the soft underbelly of European foreign policy towards China. You know, there's always been this sense when I speak with, you know, people following China that Germany's seen as want to sell as many Volkswagens as possible in China and keep the commercial and the political relationships on different tracks. But we saw with the coalition agreement late last year that this was sort of moving slowly in the direction where these would no longer be separate. And I think on Sunday, the Chancellor Scholz seemed, and you guys know better than I do on this one, but seemed to tear up 30 years of German security and defense policy over the course of an hour. And I mean, if, you know, China's watching this, they will have learned, of course, that Europe and Germany can move quickly when it wants to. You know, it's not maybe as docile as has been suspected. I think many of us Europeans are just as surprised by how quickly the dynamic has changed here. So I think there's a lot for China to learn. I think it's maybe not the primary issue, but certainly as a China-focused journalist, it's something that I've been digging into and trying to learn a lot more about. And I think it's something that will become more and more apparent down the line. If you look at some of the stories that have been coming out overnight, my newspaper, the New York Times and the Washington Post have all reported that Xi Jinping asked Vladimir Putin to hold off on some level of an invasion of Ukraine until after the Beijing Olympics. I mean, those sorts of things will not do anything to engender trust in the EU-China relationship. Of course, it's going to be very difficult to prove these things fully. I mean, the sources are coming from the US government. This will always come from the caveat in China that it's not believable, you know. But I mean, it's at the same time, all of these things are swirling in people's heads. The atmosphere is changing, and the mood is really suffering for that. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I think this is a really, you know, it's such a melting point. I mean, I'm still trying to digest everything that's happened over the last week, and it still feels like it's all very new. Anything we say now could be totally out the window in 10 minutes. But I mean, it's really interesting to observe.
Maybe we head over to Matthias immediately because he was nodding and smiling and agreeing. So would you like to comment on Finbarr?
Yeah, I switch off the video again because it says here the connection is unstable. Anyway, I just continue talking. I mean, 2-3 things maybe. I mean, the one is Chinese government as a peacemaker, as a peace broker. I'm hearing these reports since a couple of hours also coming from Europe saying China could be a peacemaker. For me, honestly, is a bit hard to imagine. I mean, is China a neutral party in this conflict? Are they really neutral? How would President Zelensky react to an idea like that? China being a peacemaker? I mean, of course, if China was, even if they're not us, they already try to frame this narrative because this would really increase their reputation but for me, honestly, it's a bit hard to imagine. I mean, are they a neutral party? They've never been a good broker, and so are they really being trusted by our side? So that is one thing. The other thing is what you said just now, Finbarr, about the German answer, the German reaction to this. I think they really got caught here in Beijing on the wrong foot, not only by the German answer to the conflict, but by the very decisive response and sanctions from the West. I mean, what I'm hearing here is that they thought, okay, when this whole thing starts, it could be over in 2-3 days, and then the sanctions will be more or less like 2014 after Crimea happened. And so they seem to be really surprised by what happened over the past few days, and they still trying to figure out how they're going to deal with this. I mean, you probably followed their first reactions, like the daily press conference here at 3 o'clock. One day it was like this, the next day they were stressing that. And so third point, yeah, I've read all these reports now coming out, also the SCMP, your paper, Finbarr, report about this, citing US sources who knew what at what time of point of time. And so yeah, and somebody was telling me today, I mean, did they really know what was coming, that something like this was coming, like so many troops moving in? Did she know it, or did officials in the Chinese apparatus, in the leadership know it and not really tell him? I mean, probably we'll never know it, but this is a really interesting question. What definitely really caught them wrong-footed here is the response by the West. And so they're trying to learn from this, what is happening now. They're definitely trying to learn. They look at the sanctions, they look at the answers, always having Taiwan in mind, of course. And they're probably calculating here in Beijing that with regard to economic sanctions, what's happening to Russia right now would probably not happen to China, because China is the elephant in the room when it comes to the world economy. And as you said, Volkswagen is they want to sell their cars here, so they're probably calculating like, okay, they would not do the same to us. Last point, what you said about, yeah, the change in the German government was an important factor, I think, the elections. And I mean, it's still early after the elections, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to see another approach to dealing with China from this German government. But I think, and I'm sure that Marc maybe could say more about this, and yeah, so far until here.
So let's give the ball to Marc again, please.
Yeah, maybe a perspective now from Berlin. I'm based here, and I think I'm also part of the German foreign and security community. And I think what you're completely right. What we see in Berlin is a paradigm shift, is a break with a traditional foreign policy of the last 50 years. The paradigm used to be trade, now it's order. And what is causing this, I think, are of course the geopolitical trends that we talk about. That's the external factors, and I think this is what this topic is of today. But if we look a little bit inside the domestic blocks, schools of thought that actually have been shifted dramatically over the last couple of weeks, it is useful to see that the power relationship between them in Berlin have shifted, and that has reasons. There's basically 7 schools of thought that dominate German thinking on foreign policy, or Germany's position in the international order for the last 100 years. And they dominate the entire mainstream. So the political parties and their families that are now in power, but also to a large degree, the Union and the CDU-CSU that has been at the government's helm under Angela Merkel. 3 of them are well known to international spectators because they are very Anglo-Saxon. Number 1 is the transatlanticists. The transatlanticists are the classical realists that see the security guarantee by the US as the guarantee that allows the survival of Europe, because we cannot basically defend ourselves, so we depend on the US. And this school of thought has been looking into the abyss under Donald Trump. And there is an overwhelming sense that now there is a very short window of opportunity to repair this vital relationship for Europe. under the presidency of Biden. And actually, that means being very amicable towards calls from Washington to be tougher on China, and also right now, of course, the calls from Washington how to act vis-a-vis Russia. This school of thought has been in an uneasy alliance with the second school of thought, which are the human rightists. The human rightists are hardly alarmed, are really alarmed over what's going on both in Russia to the killings of opposition figures and such, but also obviously what is happening in Xinjiang and in Hong Kong. This is the school of thought that has been very influential on the green thinking lately. It's an idealist thinking, but it is in a similar relationship, as we know from Washington, under the paradigm of humanitarian interventionism. It's a realist, idealistic alliance that is completely dominant of the German media landscape right now. The third school of thought, also very well known in the Anglo-Saxon world, is the free traders. The free traders had been, for an export nation like Germany, absolutely dominant for the last couple of decades. The former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and his ideas, Nord Stream 2, these kind of things come from this logic. The German industry is still extremely invested in China, is actually doubling down when it comes to investment in the Chinese market. And is also very wary of calls to now cut off economic ties with Russia. The problem for this school of thought, however, is that its main paradigm, in German it rhymes, Wandel durch Handel, has been proven not happening. Basically, the idea is that the richer a country gets, the more wealthy its citizens become, the more democratic they will become, which is not happening. So this is on the back foot, basically. And so are all the other schools of thought that have been more friendly traditionally towards Russia and China. Most importantly, that is the German Gaullists, the Eurocentrists, that basically want to acknowledge that the US is repositioning to Asia and fill the gap with a European defense posture, basically in lockstep with President Macron from France. So that is a school of thought that is trying to actually also increase the geopolitical weight of Europe, but of course has the big problem that the capabilities are not going to be there for the time being.
Marc, we have a question from the audience at this point. Maybe you can add it to your answer from Sophie from Compass TV in Indonesia. She asked, what do you make of the Southeast Asian countries, with the exception of Singapore, seemingly reluctant to openly support Ukraine, putting into factor that these countries might meet the same fate if China decides to act on the South China Sea? You have just given us an impression about the different schools of thought. How does that break down for the Southeast Asian countries?
Well, the basic point that I'm trying to make is that traditional German thinking, and like I said, there's a couple of more schools of thought. I will cut this short if it's not of interest. They are on the back foot, and this is what driving German foreign policy for the time being going forward. When it comes to Asia, there is then the idea under the Indo-Pacific strategy that we need to diversify our relationships with other Asian countries and as well increase a more assertive footprint when it comes to security policy in Eastern Asia. I think you have been watching this German frigate that was sailing through the South China Sea lately. Extremely controversial in Germany. Many would comment on that as being completely counterproductive. And it also shows, I think, from my point of view, the naivete of Berlin until very recently when it comes to this very complicated relationships that go around the South China Sea. So Germany will need to pussyfoot its way into this new landscape, which the country has woken up to lately. But I do not believe that the posture will be to increase the German footprint in East Asia. On the very contrary, the German footprint will be increased in Western Eurasia, which means the stabilization of this ring of instability that goes from Ukraine to the Middle East to the Sahel zone. This is actually where Germany will engage. And I think there will be rather a division of labor with the US when it comes to Eastern Asia.
Thank you very much. Maybe we give it to Brussels again. Finbarr, what is your reception of the, German announcement last Sunday with direct relation to China? How do they receive that? 100 billion euros investment, trillion euros investment is quite a sum even for China.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the specific numbers. I just think that the gravity of the announcement and the sudden nature of it has resonated. As I said, I was speaking to some people in think tanks in both Brussels and Germany who immediately were contacted by their counterparts in Chinese think tanks, saying, "Wow, what does this mean for us?" So it hasn't gone unnoticed. It's certainly something that's been picked up, and I think, if you look at the roster of speakers who followed Scholz in the Bundestag, I mean, Marc would know much better than this, but I was noticing some commentary around Ralf Mützenich, if I've pronounced his name correctly, the Social Democrat who took the stage and urged Xi Jinping to criticize Putin. And as somebody smarter than I said, if you would expect this from Baerbock, but not from the foreign policy doves of the upper echelons of the Social Democrats. So I think the fact that you have people who are perhaps not usually considered to be the most hawkish in German politics equating China's silence on this as tacit backing. I mean, I think that's a really interesting point. I think everybody's trying to piece together the puzzle here. I remember last week, it feels like about a year ago now, but you remember on the day that the invasion launched, there was a release that China had allowed the import of Russian grain for the first time. And this was obviously something that had been in the works for a long time. I mean, you don't go through all the technical standards and the phytosanitary criteria on this overnight, but the fact that they announced it on the day of the invasion was either a really poorly timed announcement, or it was tacitly acknowledging that, Russian industry would be sanctioned and China would give it a safe haven. So I think everybody's putting together all these little clues to try and work out where we are. I mean, I think that I generally do think that the EU will persist with trying to get China engaged on this. I watched a webinar actually on Monday with Gunnar Wiegand from the EEAS, the EU's foreign policy arm, the managing director, alongside Kurt Campbell, who's his counterpart in Washington. And the rhetoric of both was very different. Gunnar was keen to impress on the need to keep the lines of communication open with China, and whereas Kurt Campbell was saying the same, he was also saying, "Look, Gunnar, we have to be more direct on this. We have to criticize what we see as some sort of well, Matthias explained the nature of the alliance earlier, but we have to acknowledge that this is nefarious, that this is possibly not good for the world." So I do see that the EU won't go as hard as the US possibly on these issues. I know that the EU in its discussions with China has not raised the stories that have broken overnight about how much did Xi Jinping know before the Olympics? Did he ask them to hold off until after the Olympics? They haven't raised that, which suggests that they see benefit in keeping China on side, having them help diffuse the situation, whether or not, as Matthias pointed out earlier, whether that's realistic or not. I mean, I think we can speculate. The other day, Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister, actually asked China to mediate. There was a press release released on the Ukrainian foreign ministry's Facebook page, which I thought was really interesting. But I suppose, Ukraine leadership is desperate at this point. They really want to get some sort of respite in this invasion. It was notable that Kuleba posts details of all of his engagements with foreign ministers on his Twitter feed. He didn't post the one with Wang Yi. It was the only one he hasn't posted. So there's something to be read into in that point as well. We're all sort of reading the tea leaves, I suppose, seeing where this might go.
Yes, let's move back to Beijing, to Matthias. A question Finbarr just mentioned, the grain question, the grain exports. If we have a look at how this is, well, seen upon in the global south, the grain exports of Russia and Ukraine seem to be the most shocking thing in African countries. And we know for sure that in Latin America, the lack of the export of fertilizers from Ukraine and from Russia causes serious problems, and at least in the case of Bolivia, led to the result that they voted or abstained from voting in favor of the UN decision-making yesterday. Is this a geopolitical point for China if they could step into these exports to have even a more intensive grip on African and Latin American countries? How is this seen in China?
Even more, as they already have. So Matthias, it's open floor.
Yeah, I mean, I was just about to say this, Martina. I mean, this has been going on for decades already, and I mean, Chinese policy in that respect is mostly driven by their own interests. I mean, they've been traveling the world to secure their food supplies, fertilizer supplies, soybean supplies from I mean, all these soybean farms in South America run by Chinese companies. I mean, this has been ongoing for a long time. And when the story broke, like, I don't know when it was it last week or something, when they said, oh yeah, China now supporting the Russian economy by importing wheat and grain. I mean, that was long planned, I think, and this is not to support Russia. This is one of China's core interests, to secure the food supply, to feed 1.4 billion people. And of course, Ukraine and Russia, they are quite important countries when it comes to that. And China will always go to first of all make sure their own interest is served.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. And therefore, for them, it's pretty difficult to navigate the current situation. It just let me break a little bit away from the discussion we had so far, and this question goes to all our speakers, but mostly at the beginning to Matthias. We are all journalists who are tuned in today. How is the whole development perceived, reported on in China, and what do you read and see and hear on the social media? That could be of very much interest here to see what is the official line and what is the line next to it if it's not censored.
Yeah, I've tried to follow this. I mean, when the whole thing started, the first few hours, the state media, they mainly took Russian newswire reports like TASS mainly, the Global Times, for example, as a newspaper, and the others. So that was the first stage reporting, and a bit later, all these activities on social media, on Weibo started, of course, and it was flooded with comments like, oh yeah, we're going to observe this very carefully. We will draw our lessons for Taiwan. And then the users on social media, they were going like, okay, 2 hours ago, the troops were there. Now they are there already. And this is another lesson for a Taiwan invasion. And we will see how long the Russian troops need to take over cities and so on. We can draw very important lessons. These comments making fun of Ukraine, saying like, yeah, where is your ally, the US? Now they're not there helping you, and you will wait for them for ages. And it became quite nasty and nationalistic. And then at the same time, there was a minority, but it's really important to stress that it was a minority of like younger age people who sided with Ukraine, and they said we have to stand by Ukraine, and so now we're in the 7th day of the war, I think. I've just asked some people, and they and looked it up by myself. They've toned down the volume now, and it's more like in official media, also in social media. You guys know they can very easily fine-tune what gets through and what gets blocked and what gets censored, and is more neutral now. In the media, they don't take sides. There's no explicit taking sides of either Russia or Ukraine. So they're trying to moderate this down a bit. And maybe a small anecdote, and just over lunch today, I was out passing the Canadian embassy in Beijing here, passing the German embassy, the Canadian embassy. They've got huge signs outside on the wall in Chinese, in blue, yellow color. We stand by Ukraine, and we support Ukraine. German embassy being next there, they've replaced the German flag by the Ukrainian flag now. And funny thing that you see, there's all, of course, like plainclothes, state security guys running around there. But then all of the time, like young people, groups of 3, 4 young Chinese people taking pictures there, posing there, taking selfies in front of the Ukrainian flags and so on. I found it very interesting to see this afternoon.
Well, quite surprising. I thought it would be like 30 years ago, it would be erased as soon as possible, but it's not that case. You just mentioned Taiwan. We have only like 10 minutes left. So everybody, of course, thinks about the Taiwan question. White House has dispatched a high-level delegation to Taiwan, not just a few days ago, as a reassurance. Who knows? But what is your perspective, Marc? How will the future of Taiwan be? Everybody is speculating that mainland China would abuse, misuse, use this chance of a war and just invade Taiwan, which is mostly unlikely because there's no military preparation for that. But how do you see the future of Taiwan from your perspective? And then go to Finbarr and then to Matthias, I'd say.
Well, I mean, before this whole mess started in Ukraine, I always used to say that the trigger for the next world war is actually at the Strait of Taiwan, not in eastern Ukraine. And that has to do with a very fundamental different points of view what Taiwan actually means in Beijing and in Washington. For China, it's pretty clear. It's part of the mainland historically, just as much as now. On China policy, what I think is new are two things. First of all, Xi Jinping has invested his own personal prestige into this reunification. I think that really ups the ante quite significantly. So while previous leaderships have always talked about this famous quote that later, more wise generations should deal with this question, now this has become a question that is to be dealt with now. Second of all, China feels choked and threatened by the US forward presence in front of its shores, as well as this bottleneck of the Strait of Malacca, and is answering that with a twofold strategy. Number one, forward access denial, presence in the South China Sea, as well as this, escape through the BRI, through the landmass of the Eurasia to the west. Taiwan for the US means something completely different. It's not so much about politics, and I would not overestimate all this rhetoric about democracy. But for the US, basically, Taiwan is the first pillar of the defense of the US homeland. And that is basically, I think, an echo of the trauma of Pearl Harbor. and the legacy of the Second World War, where there is basically two island chains. One of them runs from Japan all the way through Taiwan to Western Papua, Borneo. And this is where the US is basically gathering all its naval presence and military strength and in order to hold this line. So if there is a misperception, and there is a misperception right now, a narrative that goes something like this, you know, the US, if you poke it long enough, as we have witnessed in Iraq and in Afghanistan, it will eventually go away. I believe that is a mistake, and it's a very dangerous mistake to believe that. The difference between Taiwan and Ukraine is that there are treaties signed over military help. So I think it's a very dangerous situation. I do not believe, Martina, that this is something to worry about now, even though, as Finbarr said, you know, all our prediction could be irrelevant in 10 minutes. We do see that China sends lots of bombers over Taiwan almost on a daily basis. So it's a dangerous situation. Still, I think maybe not in the next couple of months, but in the mid to long term, I think it's maybe the most crucial geopolitical hotspot in the world.
Great, let's move on to Finbarr in Brussels.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be really interested to see how this affects Europe's relationships with Taiwan. I think that the Taiwanese have been quite effectively lobbying in Europe to raise their profile. If you speak to officials in Lithuania, which of course have been rolling out the red carpet for Taipei, one of the reasons they give for being so supportive of Taiwan is to give it more prominence in the international discussion, so that it's more people are more aware of the problems there. You know, they want them to be accepted into international organizations like the WHO and so on, to give them a bit more international legitimacy. And they say that this perhaps will help head off any future invasion. You know, if Taiwan is an accepted part of the international community, it makes it more difficult for China to challenge it. The European Union, I see, sort of being a little bit reticent to follow on this. You know, last year they had planned to upgrade trade relations with Taiwan. I think currently the EU and Taiwan meet on a deputy director general level every year for consultations. They wanted to upgrade that, but the plan was kiboshed when von der Leyen herself stepped in and said, no, we don't want to affect the relationship with China. But I do wonder whether this Ukraine situation and how China reacts to this may sort of lead to a shift in the dynamic over Taiwan. I mean, I don't know if it will, but it makes sense that it will make it more prominent in people's thinking. As Marc said, this view of Taiwan as being almost like a front line of democracy hasn't taken root in Europe as much as it might in the United States, but I do think it's going to become a more important discussion. Currently, I do think that the EU sees Taiwan as semiconductors and little else. You know, it's associated with chips. They want to attract Taiwanese companies to invest in the European chip ecosystem, and it seems to be the extent of maybe how some people view it in its strategic importance. But I do wonder whether maybe we will see Europe maybe sort of invest a little bit more political capital in the Taiwan issue as well as economics.
Great, Matthias, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, taking over Taiwan by military force has always been an option under Xi Jinping. He always made this point, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, and I don't buy this story where they say, okay, the US is very much busy now with Russia, and China will make use of this situation. And I mean, the question is, the US has large troops in East Asia, and I mean, the important question is, will they, if China tries it, will they just stand by the US and do nothing? Will they will they not engage in the conflict? I mean, there's a big question mark. It could well be that they will come in. And then secondly, I mean, the Chinese government, I think, is smart enough that this is not the right point of time where they like, the strategy has been over the past few years, we want to build worldwide alliances and coalitions and to have support for the day when it comes. And the second thing is we have to put the economy on a strong footing where we can say, okay, when sanctions come, we are strong enough and our economy will not collapse. And so this is what's going on in Beijing. And but the other thing is what I heard here just recently, that in at least in parts of the Chinese leadership, there's some people apparently having second thoughts about this Xi Jinping narrative where he says time and momentum are on our side when it comes to Taiwan. And there seem to be people who don't really believe it anymore, and they point to Hong Kong, which is more or less a mess. So it's changed a bit over the past 12 months, 18 months, and so on. It's not that easy anymore, and I don't think a military conflict will come anytime soon. But it's still, the Taiwan Strait is probably one of the most, or the most dangerous places in the world.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And we've come to the end of today's Asia Talk session. First of all, I want to thank all three of you for taking the time in this very intense, days. We appreciate that very much. I want to thank the audience for tuning in today. And secondly, I want to thank you for your great input. I think we're going to have a different grip on Sino-Russian relations after this, and have learned a lot from you. Thank you very much. That's from my side, and this is the last handover to Martina.
Well, again from my side, thank you as well. A great deal that you had the time for sparing 60 minutes with us today. Actually, the Asia Talks Season 3 are at their end with today's, but having listened to all of you speakers with your great input, and there's so many topics still left, we will go for another one because this really calls for a follow-up. And we are very happy to see that our audience was really international. It was not only German, but it was really going global. So that is something we appreciated a lot also for the participants and for the audience to tune in. And we hope that you all stay healthy, and that whatever the crisis will have come out will be, as far as we can say that, a relatively quick and good one. Thank you everybody for sparing your time. Hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.